Rusted metal groaned beneath tiny hands. The ancient locomotive standing defiant against endless sand. Minna wiped sweat from her brow, leaving another streak of grime across her face. The desert sun beat down mercilessly as she knelt beside the strange mechanical cylinder, its blue-green core pulsing with a light that shouldn't exist in something so old. Her tattered dress, once white but now a patchwork of dust and oil stains, offered little protection from the scorching heat. At 8 years old, she had the focused eyes of someone much older. "Pass me the spanner," she called to Tessa, who was balanced precariously on the train's massive front boiler. Tessa, the youngest at 6, slid down with practiced ease, her bare feet finding purchase on hot metal that would have blistered an adult. Her movements were quick and deliberate, unhampered by her ragged dress that had once been some shade of yellow. She tossed the tool with surprising accuracy. "Do you really think this thing will work?" Tessa asked, her voice carrying the hint of an accent that didn't exist on Earth. Ren, the oldest at 10, poked her head out from the engineer's cabin. Her dark hair was matted against her head, and her once green dress hung in tatters around her skinny frame. "It has to," she said simply. "The collectors will be here by nightfall." The mention of their captors sent a chill through Minna despite the heat. She turned her attention back to the cylinder, carefully connecting wires that seemed to pulse beneath her touch. The technology was unlike anything they'd been taught about in the prison schools, a strange fusion of steam-era mechanics and something far more advanced. "I found something else," Ren called out, excitement edging into her voice. She emerged from the cabin holding what looked like an ancient log book. Its pages yellowed and crisp. It's got star charts and something about awakening protocols. Minna frowned. That doesn't sound like something a train should have. A distant hum made all three girls freeze. They turned as one toward the horizon, where heat waves distorted the view of distant mountains. Nothing was visible yet, but they knew what that sound meant. The collector ships were getting closer. "We need to hurry," Ren said, sliding back into the cabin with the book tucked under her arm. As Tessa scrambled back up to continue working on the boiler connections, Minna closed her eyes for a moment, fighting back the memories that threatened to overwhelm her. But they came anyway, fragments of the past breaking through like shards of glass. The first day of capture, bright lights and clinical white walls. The processing room with its antiseptic smell. The cold metal table beneath her as they implanted the tracking chip at the base of her skull. Subject displays higher than average neural plasticity. A voice had said somewhere above her head, "Mark for special observation." The uniform they'd given her then had been clean and perfectly sized. A white coverall with a barcode where her name should be. It wasn't until the escape that she'd found the dress, stealing clothes from an abandoned storage facility on their way out. The lessons in the prison school had been the worst. Learning the history of Earth's surrender to the collectors, the benevolent resettlement of children whose genetic profiles matched certain criteria, the careful explanation that they weren't prisoners, but specially selected participants in the greatest scientific endeavor the galaxy had ever known. Lies, all of it. Ren had figured that out first. Ren, who had seen her parents fight back during the collection, who had watched them fall under the neural stunners, who understood what the adults in the facility really meant when they spoke of processing and resource extraction. "Minna, I need you." Tessa's voice snapped her back to the present. The cylinder in her hands had begun to glow brighter, the blue-green light now pulsing in a steady rhythm that matched her heartbeat. She scrambled to her feet and raced to the front of the train, where Tessa was pointing at a panel that had slid open on the side of the boiler. Inside was a socket that looked exactly the right size for the cylinder. "It's like it was made for it," Tessa whispered, a mix of awe and fear in her voice. From somewhere deep within the train came a sound like a sleeping giant, drawing its first breath in centuries. Metal creaked and steam hissed from valves that had suddenly come alive. "Ren," Minna called out, "I think something's happening." The oldest girl appeared at the cabin window, her eyes wide. "The controls are lighting up by themselves," she shouted back. "There's writing appearing on the screens, but it's not in any language I've seen before." Minna looked down at the cylinder, in her hands, then at the socket in the boiler. A decision point. They could abandon the train now. Try to find another way to escape the approaching collectors, or they could take a chance on this strange machine that seemed to be waking up around them. The distant hum grew louder. No more time for debate. Do it, Wren called as if reading her thoughts. We don't have any other options. Minna took a deep breath and slid the cylinder into the socket. It clicked into place with a sound of perfect precision, like the final tumbler falling in a lock. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the world exploded into light. Leorin hadn't spoken aloud in 3 months, not since the day her ship burned up in orbit, leaving her with only a half-functional escape pod and a sliver of atmosphere to work with. She survived the crash, barely, and made her way across the cracked plains with nothing but a pressure suit, a salvaged solar filter, and the hope that the signals she'd intercepted weren't lies. What she found wasn't a city, or a station, or even a ruin. It was a garden. A glass garden. Miles of curved crystalline domes stretched across the sunlit basin like dewdrops on ancient stone. Some were cracked, overtaken by creeping green. Others pulsed with a faint bioluminescence. The garden wasn't dead, it was sleeping, or dreaming. Liorn had made her shelter in one of the smaller domes, a half-collapsed shell of vines and rusted supports. The plants inside were different. They responded to movement, to breath, to thought. Some flowers only opened when she hummed. Others grew tiny fruits shaped like spirals or stars. Still, she hadn't seen another person since the crash. She told herself she didn't mind until today. She was foraging for fungal caps near the edge of Dome 6 when she heard the sound. A low vibration, like something mechanical turning in deep soil. She froze, crouched behind a fern with feathery white fronds, and waited. Another sound followed, softer. Human. A cough. Liorn crept forward, careful not to disturb the biosensitive moss. The source of the sound was a figure kneeling by the irrigation roots, hands buried in the glassy soil. The person wore no helmet. Their skin was pale from years without sun. Their hair was silver blonde, tangled and long. They were humming softly. He was humming the same tune she'd used to open the orchid gates. Leorin stepped out from the foliage. He didn't startle. He simply looked up, blinked, and smiled as if he'd been waiting for her. "You're late," he said. Liorn opened her mouth, but no sound came. Her voice, unused for so long, refused to rise. He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. He wore loose-fitting bio-weave clothes, clearly grown from the garden itself. A leafy band circled his wrist, glowing faintly with sync patterns. "It's okay," he said. "You'll speak when you're ready." He extended a hand. She took it. His name was Kale. The next week unfolded like a slow rebirth. Kale showed her corners of the glass garden she hadn't dared explore, corridors that responded to their emotions, benches that folded open into sleeping pods, living walls that whispered in languages neither of them fully understood. He told her he'd been born here, grown, more accurately, by the Titan's biointerface systems. After the first awakening years ago, the planet had begun building him from encoded memory as a bridge between human presence and machine world. "I'm not a ghost," he said, "but I'm also not exactly real." Leorin touched his wrist gently, where the vine bend pulsed. "You feel real." He smiled. "Then maybe that's enough." Each day brought something new, a burst of strange flowers blooming in their path, or a glimmer of light trailing through the treetops that turned out to be a guidance sprite. They found ancient schematics encoded into fruit seeds, and when planted, those seeds grew into memory trees. On the 5th day, a train rumbled beneath their feet, not overhead, but under the garden, a buried transport vein stirring. "They're coming," Kale whispered, as if remembering a story from another life. "The ones who started it all." Leorin found her voice that night. Her first word was his name. Rain came 3 days later. Warm, crystalline droplets that shimmered like glass and evaporated on contact. It wasn't natural, but neither was anything here. They stood beneath one of the older domes, arms wrapped around each other, watching as the garden sang in response. Flowers opened in waves. Trees shook their branches, and low notes hummed through. The earth, like the garden, was tuning itself. "This is what they tried to erase," Kale said. "The collectors, they feared this place not for its weapons, but for what it could feel. Leorin leaned her forehead against his chest. Then, "Let them fear us both," she whispered. Kale kissed her first. It was tentative, soft, like the opening of a flower. Her hands were in his hair, his fingers resting on her cheek, and for a moment, the entire garden seemed to still. Then the trees around them pulsed with color. A low chord rang out from the soil beneath them. The Titan had noticed. "I think," Kale murmured against her lips, "it approves." Not everything in the garden was gentle. A few days after the kiss, they found a gate sealed by a thorn lock. Kale tried to bypass it, but the thorns reacted violently, lashing out with enough force to rip his palm open. Leorin dragged him back, pressing moss into the wound as it bled copper-tinged blood. "It's because I'm part of the system," he said weakly. "The garden sees me as part of itself. But you're new, unfiltered." She looked at the gate. Then, "Maybe I'm what it needs to change." It took 3 tries and a song she'd never sung before. But the gate opened. Beyond it lay a chamber not of plants, but memory walls lined with light, floating fragments of the past. She saw children escaping on a train, a desert blooming with energy, and beneath it all, a heart slowly beating. Kale stepped beside her, awe in his expression. "We're not alone," Leorin said, "and we're not the end of the story." He reached for her hand, where the beginning. The train passed beneath them again that night. The sound was clearer now, closer. The garden pulsed in time with it. "We should go to them," Leorin said. "They'll need someone to guide them through this." Kale nodded. "Then we go, together." Their final night in the glass garden was silent and full of stars. The domes bloomed behind them as they left, petals of glass folding inward like the world was folding its hands in prayer. Together, they followed the sound of the train. And somewhere beneath the ground, the Titan stirred again. Nira hadn't meant to fall in love with a falling star. She was a salvager, a drifter in the outer lanes of fractured orbit. Her ship, the Windrun, was patched together from the wrecks of a dozen others, its hull mismatched, its AI stuttering, its gravity field held stable by constant recalibration. But it was hers, and that meant something in a system where ownership was a myth. She found the fragment drifting near the shadow side of the moon. It looked like a seed wrapped in crystal, humming with energy, but the AI refused to scan it. It kept repeating one word: forbidden. Nira laughed at that. Everything good was forbidden. So she brought it aboard. It wasn't until she slept with it beside her that the dreams began. She saw a planet blooming from the inside, roots growing skyward, clouds curling into spiral formations, and at the center a figure with wings of living metal and a voice like stormlight. She woke up crying, though she didn't know why. He arrived a week later. His ship was sleek, veined with iridescent gold and shaped like a falcon in descent. It didn't register on any comms, no approach ping, no signature trace. One moment the Windrun was alone. The next, a winged craft hovered alongside it. Then he was on her ship. He didn't knock. He just appeared. "That seed doesn't belong to you," he said. Nira stood between him and the object, pulse high, hand near the edge of her belt where a plasma cutter hung. "Neither do you." He smiled faintly. "I'm not here to harm you, but you've taken something older than your stars, and it's waking." "What are you, Jul?" he said. "A courier from a forgotten world, and that seed, it belongs to the Titan." His wings weren't symbolic. They were real. They shimmered when he moved, folded down his back when he rested. She didn't ask if they were grafted or grown. She just accepted it. Jul explained that he came from a lineage bred to carry messages between starbound Titans. When the old network died, the couriers vanished, scattered or absorbed by other empires. He had been sleeping in a satellite graveyard until the Titan below began to stir. "You answered the call," he said. "You're part of it now." Nira shook her head. "I don't follow prophecies. I follow profit." "Then why did you keep the seed near your heart when you slept?" She didn't answer. Traveling with Jul was infuriating. He quoted extinct poets. He listened to star waves like they were music. He had opinions on the best way to roast solar root and preferred silence when working. But he also rewired her ship in hours, recalibrated the shields to withstand plasma tides. And when she fell asleep on the floor, exhausted, he covered her with a heat blanket without saying a word. She began to trust him, and that terrified her. The seed cracked open 2 days before landfall. A single vine emerged, thin and golden. It twined up the air vent, pulsing softly. "It's searching," Jill said. "It knows its home is near." Nira watched the vine grow and thought of her own roots, how she had none. No family, no home, only space and wreckage. "Maybe it can make one," she whispered. Joel turned to her. "You already have." He kissed her after the second solar storm. They'd taken shelter in the ship's maintenance cradle, the lights flickering, the air thick with ionized particles. She'd been talking about the first time she flew alone. He'd been listening with that soft, infuriating intensity he always had. She turned her head and found his lips. It wasn't dramatic. No crescendo, just a breath shared between two lonely people finally touching the same frequency. The planet appeared beneath them like a dream. Trees taller than cities, oceans glowing with bioluminescent bloom, and in the center a pulse of energy shaped like a heart. "They're already there," Jill said, pointing to a flickering signal on the surface. "The children, the garden, the network is knitting itself back together. And what's our part in this? We bring the sky. We tell the stars it's time to listen again." They landed at dusk. The seed, now a fully unfurled vine, guided them to a cliffside overlooking a sleeping giant. Not a statue, but a being of metal and root, curled around a crystal core. Nira held Joel's hand as the air shimmered. The Titan opened its eyes, and Nira, for the first time in her life, felt known. Joel single quotes as hand tightened around hers. "It's not just waking," he said softly. "It's remembering." "What's it remembering?" He looked at her, something reverent in his expression. "Us." The city beneath the planet's skin had no name, at least, not anymore. Senya first saw it through cracked sensor glass and grit-streaked lenses, buried deep in the lowest tier of the archive. She hadn't expected it to be beautiful. Not after all the war, not after the quakes, and especially not after the silence. But it was beautiful, terrible, a field of towers bent inward, like glass trees caught in a permanent wind. Their once clear forms fused and melted, now glowing faintly with bioluminescent veins. Not lights, veins. The planet's own blood still ran through them. It pulsed blue. Senya adjusted her scarf and moved forward. Dust kicked from her boots. She kept the old blade strapped to her thigh and a thermal flare tucked under her elbow. But mostly she kept quiet. Silence was the rule here. The city hadn't just been buried, it had been sealed. And if the Titan was waking, as the signals from above suggested, then something down here had to be its spinal root. Her job was simple: locate the activation cradle, transmit a reading, and if anything was still alive, well, she was supposed to report that to. She didn't plan to. Senya had stopped reporting a long time ago. She reached the edge of the inner ring as dusk fell across the underlayers. Not real dusk this far underground. There was no sun but an artificial dusk as the bioluminescent towers dimmed in synchronized hush. That's when she saw him. Or maybe felt him first, a figure crouched in the half-shadow of a shattered transrail line, head bent over some rusted relay console. He didn't move when she approached, but his fingers danced across the broken circuitry like it still mattered. He didn't notice her until she coughed. His head jerked up fast. Senya raised a hand, open-palmed. "Don't run." He didn't. He just watched, pale eyes, hair too long, tied back with some makeshift filament cord. His face was smeared with engine soot. And he didn't speak. "Are you injured?" she asked carefully. He tilted his head slightly, then looked down at his hands, then up again, and shook his head once, mute, or choosing silence. Either way, she understood. Senya stepped closer. "I'm Senya. I'm not from the collectors. I don't work for them anymore." A flicker of something behind his gaze. Still not a word. But he didn't run. She took that as a small victory. She didn't expect it to mean she'd be sharing a fire with him an hour later. But she was. He showed her the safe house by gestures alone, tiny movements efficient. Like he'd been doing this too long to bother wasting energy. It was a mechanical substation half-collapsed, overgrown with biosteel vines that glowed faintly when you touched them inside. It was surprisingly warm. He had coils, blankets, even a working heater powered by something she didn't recognize. She sat by the little stove, grateful. He passed her a packet of rehydrated root fruit, something that smelled better than anything she'd eaten in days. She nodded in thanks. Still, no words. She watched him as he worked on a bundle of worn-down parts in the corner, adjusting some kind of synthetic joint. His movements were quiet, careful, almost tender. "You're repairing the tower lines," she said after a moment. "Why?" He looked up. His lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. Then he tapped his chest, then the wall, then held up a hand. 5 fingers. Waited. 5. What? 5 days. He nodded. "You knew I was coming." Another nod. Senya blinked. "You saw the signals from the Titan." He paused. Then he reached into a nearby crate and pulled out a tattered screen tablet held together with wire and faith. He tapped it once. A familiar symbol bloomed across the dusty glass, spiraling circuits wrapped in vine script. It was the Titan's pulse signature. Her breath caught. "You've been connected this whole time," she whispered. "You're part of it." He looked at her again, and for the first time, she saw something gentle in his expression. Not pride, not warning, something more fragile. Loneliness. His name was Evan. He couldn't tell her that himself, but she found it scratched into the metal frame of a nearby tool chest, crudely etched, like he'd needed to remember it himself. It felt too human for this place. They spent 2 days together, mapping the inner core of the broken city. Senya walked the upper terraces while Evan mapped what pulsed below. At night, they compared notes, him writing, her talking. It became a rhythm. She found herself smiling again, laughing even. He made her laugh once just by holding up a broken drone and making a mock horrified face when it sparked. It was a dumb gesture, but it landed. Her shoulders had been tight for months. That one laugh made something loosen. She didn't know what to call the warmth that bloomed in her chest after. She didn't want to name it yet, but it felt like possibility. On the 3rd day, she found the hatch. It was buried beneath layers of fused glassroot, but Evan helped her clear it. The doorway led into a cylindrical chamber with 7 pillars surrounding a central platform. Each pillar glowed faintly when they entered. One of them was already pulsing blue. "That's the train," she said. "It's connected." Evan tapped her shoulder and pointed at another pillar, one dim, but pulsing faintly now that they were inside. He held up 2 fingers. Senya nodded slowly. "The garden. The others are waking." He smiled, just faintly, and then he touched the central platform. Light exploded outward, calm, not violent. A field of symbols danced around them, images, maps, movement. The planet was the Titan. The Titan was awake. And she and Evan were now part of its memory. She reached out. Her hand brushed his. Electricity, not from the platform, from the skin. Their eyes met. The maps spun around them like stars. And Senya felt something she hadn't in years. Chosen. She didn't pull her hand back. Neither did he. That night, as they sat beside the tiny heater again, she leaned into him. He didn't move away. She rested her head on his shoulder. He breathed in once, slow. She whispered, "You've been alone down here too long." He nodded. "And I think I'm supposed to be here. With you." She didn't expect an answer, but he reached up and traced her fingers with his, slowly, as if drawing a map of her hand into memory. She leaned in, closer, and this time, when she kissed him, he didn't hesitate. It was soft, warm, not desperate, just true. The next day, they connected the 2nd pillar, and deep beneath the ice above, something massive stirred. The Titan's spine had awoken, and 2 hearts beat at its center. It was raining again, but this time the rain sang. Mira stood on the highest plateau of the northern ridge, where the world bent like a tilted bowl, and the stars came closer than breath. She had followed the pulse all the way from the edge of the broken colonies to this impossible convergence. Around her, the landscape shimmered. Trees made of light swayed in rhythm with the wind, and every drop of rain that touched the soil left behind a whisper. Not words, not yet, but intention, a language that wanted to be born. Mira pressed her palm to the stone outcrop where a glyph glowed. 5 shapes spiraling inward. 5 pulses. 5 stories. 5 lives. The train had arrived 3 days ago, splitting the valley with its thunder. She hadn't believed the old messages were true. Not really. Not after Earth fell. Not after the collectors sealed the skies, but the Titan had woken, and the planet hadn't burned. It had bloomed. And now she was here to finish what the others had begun. Mira was a translator by trade, a cartographer of dead alphabets. She understood the power of language better than anyone, and when the planet began to speak, it was her job to listen. But she hadn't come alone. He stood behind her now, tall, quiet, wearing the kind of eyes that had seen stars collapse. His name was Kieran, and he was the only collector who ever defected. They'd met on a derelict moon station orbiting a dead sun. She had been there for salvage. He had been there for penance. She didn't trust him at first. How could she? The collectors had taken everything, turned worlds into databanks, reduced people into samples. But he didn't run. He didn't lie. He just offered her the location of the last untranslated shard and then bled for it. Literally. He had burned his link node out of his own spine. Why? She'd asked, cradling him on the rusted floor. Because I heard the planet, he whispered. And it didn't sound like a target. It sounded like home. Now, days later, they stood before the final interface, the HEARTSTONE. It rose from the ground like a monument, carved by no hand. Its surface shimmered with images, faces, names, lives all braided into a single glowing braid. Mira approached first. Her translator band glowed in sympathy. Ready? She asked without turning. Kieran stepped beside her. His hands trembled. Just slightly. I don't think we'll ever be ready, he said. But I want to be there when it happens. Then let's begin. She placed her hand on the stone, and the world opened. She saw everything. The children on the train, chased by war and fate. The woman in the glass garden, giving breath to a sleeping world. The salvager and the sky courier, stitching heaven and earth. The mechanic in the dead city, waiting for light to return. All of it connected. The Titan was never a weapon. It was memory. And the ghost ship had never been a ship. It was a seed. Mira cried as the words filled her mind, not in language, but in feeling. Not a command, but a promise. You were never forgotten, the planet said. You were always the answer. Kieran fell to his knees. His old scars glowed, not with pain, but release. It forgives us, he whispered. Even after everything we did, it still wants us. Mira reached for him. We're not what we were, she said. We're what we choose to become. And when she kissed him, the heartstone pulsed once, then dissolved into light. The skies broke open that night, not with fire, but with life. Flowers bloomed where bombs had fallen. Signal towers bent into trees. The ghost ship, now fully transformed, rose into the sky not as metal but as a living thing, carrying memories forward. And around the world, 5 places pulsed blue. 5 hearts. 5 beginnings. Not the end. Never. The end. Just the start of a world no longer asleep. And a love that would write its own language in the soil.